Oh boy, The Last of Us Part 1 Remake, a remake of a game that has already been released 2 times before, once originally on the PS3 and then a remaster on the PS4, is now getting a remake on the PS5, and it's definitely worth the $70 you're gonna have to pay for it, even though the original game was only $60, you know, even though you could get it for like less than 20 bucks on the PS4 if you really wanted to. Now, for the exact same game, you're gonna have to pay $70 fucking dollars. Definitely worth it. Anyway, PlayStation fanboys and Naughty Dog fanboys, you know, basically the same people. They are damage controlling this remake so fucking hard. And today we're going to be taking a look at someone who made a little video defending The Last of Us Part 1 Remake. So let's look at that, shall we?
React to and perceive the way video game developers talk has become a very strange thing to watch the last few years. There are plenty of reasons all the time to lose faith in the word of certain developers when an idea or a feature is announced to be in a game only to have it completely lacking when the time comes to launch the product. It happens all the time. Sometimes for completely normal reasons, such as the vision changing mid-development, or a feature as it's developing doesn't end up materializing the way it was originally planned and it gets dropped. These are never reasons to get upset, however, there are of course instances of a game being marketed to be something it just isn't. Cyberpunk 2077 and No Man's Sky were a couple notable times where what you bought wasn't nearly what it was made out to be. There's always a conversation that needs to be had about the transparency between the developer and the consumer when situations like this arise, but in recent years, things have simply gotten out of hand.
I don't think it's gotten out of hand, I think it's gotten better. I feel like people nowadays, most people anyway, are even less willing to take shit from developers as they were back when games like No Man's Sky came out.
In any medium, when something is on the come up or doing very well, you start to see a shift as the years go by. Even if the quality of the work gets better, a crowd always tends to emerge who, for whatever reason, wants to cut that thing down to size.
I mean, true, people will literally hate on anything for any reason, especially if they're fanboys. Like Xbox fanboys will hate The Last of Us for simply being a PlayStation exclusive, of course. But the thing is, I find with Last of Us Part 2, and especially now with Part 1 Remake, I find a lot of the criticism to be incredibly fucking valid. Like, for example, the story in Last of Us 2 has been heavily criticized, and while I don't think that all of the criticism of the story of The Last of Us 2 is valid, I still do agree with the idea that, you know, the story was quite shit.
The Last of Us Part 1 is the most recent target of this conversation. It seems the term remake as it pertains to video games is getting very lost, so let's find it. In order to find it, it's important to differentiate it from the term remaster.
Yeah, it is. It is very important to differentiate it from the term remaster. See, a remaster is basically just the original game, but with a higher frame rate and better graphics. A remake is where they rebuild the entire game from the ground up, usually with different gameplay or like extra levels or shit like that, right? That is not what has happened with The Last of Us Part 1 quote-unquote remake, seeing as the gameplay is exactly the same. The level design also appears to be exactly the same, and the only thing that has been changed really are the graphics and the frame rate and, you know, things that usually only change with a remaster.
The Last of Us was remastered in 2014 as a tool to help Naughty Dog get accustomed to developing for the PlayStation 4. It featured higher resolution character models that were meant to close the gap between what was used on the PlayStation 3 only in cutscenes. The game also featured a higher frame rate option as well as higher resolution support. There were no gameplay changes.
Just like there aren't any gameplay changes in The Last of Us Part 1 Remake. Guess it's a remaster after all, boys. Damn.
Nothing groundbreaking done to in-game textures. It served its purpose as a test for Naughty Dog, and people were more than welcome to pay for it, considering the PlayStation 3 version just 1 year earlier had become one of gaming's most beloved.
I'm sorry, you don't see that as a problem? You know, they're welcome to pay for it. You don't see it as a problem that a developer releases a video game, and then a year later they remaster and re-release the exact same game. You don't see that as kind of, you know, an issue. I mean, it's kind of scammy, isn't it, for them to release a game and then not 1 year later for them to re-release the exact same game with higher graphics and better frame rate and all that on, you know, a better performing console. Like at that point, why didn't they just, I don't know, wait a year and release the better version first, you know, on the fucking PS4, or release both of them at the same time? Now it just kind of feels like, oh, a lot of people like this game, let's quickly make a remaster so that we know, because we know, you know, that people who already love this game will buy it anyway.
Securing Naughty Dog's spot on a pedestal in the eyes of many consumers, it was a moment after 3 Uncharted games that sent a message. They were at the top of the food chain in game development, with their most recent project having been a textbook remaster. Now let's take a look at what was called a remake, released at full price, that no one had any issues with. In early 2018, Bluepoint Games released a from-the-ground-up remake of 2005's Shadow of the Colossus, another game that is considered one of gaming's greatest, a game originally released for the PlayStation 2.
Yeah, and you don't see how this is different from The Last of Us Part 1 remake. See, the difference is, here we have a game from 2005 that was released on the PlayStation 2 that then got remade, right, in, I believe it was like 2017, 2018 for the PS4. Now there's like more than 10 years in between the original game and the remake. With The Last of Us Part 1, there has been an original game, a remaster, and now a remake, all within less than 10 years.
Every single visual aspect of this game got much more than a facelift. It looked like a game that could have originally launched in 2018 with visual fidelity rivaling anything coming out around it. However, its original gameplay and gameplay animations were kept intact as you remembered them from 2005. It plays identically. This is still very much a remake. When a game is so beloved, there is an important decision you need to make when remaking it.
Wait, how is it still a remake? I'm pretty sure that the only difference between, you know, the remake and the game, the original from 2005, is, you know, the graphics and the frame rate. So, you know, it should be considered a remaster then, shouldn't it?
There's a large crowd of its original fans that are going to want it to retain the same feel on the controller that it did in the form they remember falling in love with. Gameplay is the most important piece of the puzzle. You are treading on thin ice no matter what you do to it. More often than not, the best bet is to retain that feeling somehow.
Okay, but like if the gameplay is the exact same, then it's not a remake, is it? If the gameplay and the feel and just basically the entire game is the exact same, and the only thing that's different are the graphics and the frame rate, then it's not a remake, it's a remaster. I don't care if it's been built from the ground up completely. It is still a remaster. Okay, a remake would mean that it's actually like different and they thought about it differently. They remade it completely.
Bluepoint Games remaking Shadow of the Colossus was not their first time getting their hands on it either. In fact, they remastered it in 2011, 6 years after its initial outing, giving it exactly that, a resolution and frame rate bump, one that was desperately needed. Its remake was released 7 years later, an entire year less than the distance between The Last of Us Remastered and The Last of Us Part 1, with no complaints in sight in regards to Shadow of the Colossus.
I don't know, I don't really feel like the PS3 version, or re-release, I guess, of Shadow of the Colossus really counts as a remaster. I mean, I know that might sound fucking weird to a lot of you, but this is back in like the PS3, Xbox 360 era, where they would take a lot of games from the previous generation, make them widescreen, and then just re-release them on the new consoles and go like, oh, it's totally different now, guys. You should definitely buy the game again.
For the PS2, and I think it went to HD.
And another reason why I believe not a lot of people were upset about the Shadow of the Colossus remake and why they are upset about the Last of Us Part 1 remake is that the Shadow of the Colossus, from what I can tell, didn't pretend to be anything else than, you know, the original game, while Last of Us Part 1 definitely tries to seem like it's a whole new way to experience this classic game, even though it's basically the exact same thing. The Shadow of the Colossus remake didn't do that. It was basically just like, hey, here is the Shadow of the Colossus with better graphics. Also, when the Shadow of the Colossus remake launched, the price for the game was $40, which I believe is the same as the game was when it originally came out on the PS2, but the Last of Us Part 1 remake is $70 fucking dollars, which is more expensive than when the original game came out on PS3, which is, you know, bullshit.
Because people loved that game and it could have stood to benefit from being brought into current technology. So why would it matter in the case of The Last of Us Part 1? Because Naughty Dog has had a target on its back for the last 2 years since their vision for The Last of Us Part 2 didn't align with a very specific demographics vision for the game they spent 7 years creating in their heads and felt entitled to.
Entitled? Really? I mean, I think people probably felt entitled to play the game that they saw in the marketing, but then the marketing turned out to be a fucking lie, and the entire game was about something different. Now, I don't really care if the marketing does something like that, when the surprise twists end up being fucking good and not shit. Like, I don't give a shit that Joel died, right? I don't really give a shit about Joel to begin with. If I'm gonna be honest, I thought it was kind of a cunt. I mean, you know, if a guy goes into a hospital and then shoots the only doctors that can save humanity from, you know, the apocalypse, he is kind of a cunt, let's be completely honest. But the story of the game is full of plot holes, and I honestly cannot remember a single likable character from the game. Like, honestly, the whole you play half of the game as Abby in this case, and the other half as Ellie, and these are two characters that hate each other. And, you know, during Abby's part of the campaign, there are, like, I don't fucking know, like, some characters that I hate, but they're, like, her friends, and as Ellie's part of the campaign, you kill those friends. That could be cool, and in concept, that's a really cool idea. However, it only works if the story is executed well and I actually give a shit about the characters. The only thing I thought was kind of cool is when the dog dies, because the dog is the only, I guess, character I like. But it's a fucking dog, like, how can you really hate a dog? But that was cool. That was a cool moment where you, like, remember Abby plays with the dog and then Ellie kills the fucking dog. Anyway, moving on. I feel like I'm rambling.
Mob of people criticizing Naughty Dog at every possible opportunity for not getting something that they were never promised is unending. But one thing is clear. The Last of Us Part 1 is, by the most used criteria in video games, a remake. No amount of complaining about it is going to change that. The level of work is very evident. Visual improvements here are leaps and bounds ahead of what comes with a remaster.
No, that's not how it works. You can't do that. You can't say early on in the video that a remaster is only when they change the visuals and up the fucking frame rate, and a remake is when they build it from the ground up and they change shit, to now say, oh, it definitely is a remake because it has better graphics. By definition, it is then a remaster. You said it so yourself in the beginning of the fucking video.
The character models are not upgraded versions of the original game, they're either brand new or updated versions of what we saw in The Last of Us Part 2. The preserved performances given by the actors over 10 years ago are also on display with the new animation systems. The subtle face movements translate very well into these new character models. The main issue at hand is the talk of gameplay, and the sheer misunderstanding of what is contained in the word gameplay.
Oh my god, guy, if we're gonna talk about like, oh, atmosphere is part of gameplay too or some shit. I mean, yeah, I guess it is. But, you know, if you change the fucking models of the characters and like the textures of the game, that doesn't inherently change the gameplay very much, you know what I mean?
Joel's movement system, gunplay, and melee system is where those are forcing their tunnel vision. How the enemy's AI interacts with Joel and your companions is a part of gameplay, a part that has had a massive rework. The AI in Part 2 were already worlds ahead of Part 1, and it even has improvements over what was accomplished in that game back in 2020. The combat encounters in this version of the game are not going to be as predictable as AI were almost 10 years ago.
Okay, guys, I was wrong. It is indeed a remake. Everything in the game is exactly the same. But they changed the AI. They made it better. The entire game will now be different. I'm kind of being a cunt, but like that's not enough though. Like the entire game is exactly the same, you know, except for like I guess the graphics and the AI, and that warrants it being called a remake then. But how are you gonna compare this to something like the Resident Evil 2 remake, which is completely different, right? It's completely different from the original. That's a real remake. It's been built from the ground up. It is gameplay-wise, basically in every single way it's different, right? Except for I guess like the main plot and shit like that. And Last of Us Part 1 Remake is in every single way exactly the same, except for the AI and the graphics. But they're both remakes, right? Okay, sure.
Gameplay. Just because some decided to selectively only look at dodging and prone doesn't remove everything else that was worked on from the equation. Part 2's exact gameplay model was never promised to be brought into Part 1, it was just assumed, nor should Joel be running around like a 20-year-old girl.
Okay. Man, I don't care that they didn't bring in like the Part 2 gameplay or whatever, right? I mean, if they could have done that, they should have. But the problem here is they didn't change anything from the gameplay. I don't care how much you're gonna talk about like, oh, but they changed the animations. Oh, but the AI is different. That doesn't mean shit. I censored myself by not pronouncing the I in the word shit. I don't know why I did that. It doesn't mean shit, okay? Because basically the entire game is the exact same thing as the original. But the only thing that's different about the gameplay, according to you, are the animations that play when you, I guess, shoot your gun or something, and the AI. Do you think that it is enough to have this game being called a remake when other remakes, again like the Resident Evil 2 remake, are so incredibly different from the original? I'm honestly kind of done with this video. Like, for the rest of the video, he talks about things like price and, oh yeah, the game is $70 fucking, but hey, you can just get it on sale, which is definitely 100% a very good way of countering the argument that the game is too expensive. Just buy it when it's cheap, right? Fuck the base price, that isn't relevant. Anyway, guys, this is the end of the video. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.